Could you imagine Pokken where we got this guy instead of this guy? With their exact same attacks, how would their form differences affect Decidueye's entire moveset? And how would this change their Pokemon attacks? Could other moves compensate so that they would have attacks of a similar style? Pokemon has recently been using more and more regional variants for many of their side games. Of the cast, Decidueye is the only character with a regional variant, form changes of pre-existing Pokemon based on the new region environment that luckily has not been removed from the series yet. So welcome to this theory craft of what happened if the spooky Decidueye in Pokken was replaced by this fighting type sharpshooter. It's obviously important to establish how the two owls are dissimilar to each other. Physically speaking, Alolan Decidueye's wingspan is way bigger than the Hisuian Decidueye's. This is the most clear visual difference. So, Hisuian Decidueye has the short end of the stick in range for very useful wing-based attacks. This would be a huge nerf to the character, with a shorter grab, stubbier normals, and a counterattack with less hits. See how he is attacking with his entire wing here? Now cut that off by a fourth. With that established, let's go over Decidueye's main tools that would be affected. 5Y as a pressure tool is helped immensely by its range, being able to lay down the pressure from decently far away by canceling into aerial actions. Meanwhile, 8Y would not hit as high with its first hit, and lots of dive kicks love to stall briefly for this sorry situation for Decidueye to be more consistent. It would also make his homing attack not have unnecessary vertical range. So in other words, it's now a fair move and I've saved the Pokkén Tournament community. Having a shorter range is a common theme for these wing-based attacks for Hisuian Decidueye, but let's overview the greatest nerf this would cause. Easily, Decidueye's most prominent wing move is JY. Alolan Decidueye's wings are so long that they reach many grounded opponents while rising up from a jump. It's a devastating pressure tool and combo starter by transitioning into various options afterward, which also utilizes his wings, so you know another move is being snipped here. A range reduction makes landing Rising JY harder on middle height characters that had no problem hitting before, so Soaring Stance Y would be more inconsistent comboing after JY at higher heights. Alolan Decidueye can do a lot of nasty mix-ups on block with Rising JY, but on whiff, he's punishable. He's unable to transition into other tools when it misses, and a shorter range would make this occur more frequently. And for the final nail in the coffin, 8Y on air hit was another way to go into these air combos. Now Hisuian Decid might be air styled like this, and from a balancing sense, they could buff all these attacks by making them do more damage, but from a lore perspective, and yes, I will nerd out on you all since this goes into my next big difference, Hisuian Decidueye's leg muscles are much bigger and stronger than Alolan Decid's. Owl already incorporates many kick-based attacks in Pokken. Rather than Hisuian Decidueye's wing attacks being stronger to compensate for the lack of range, I would picture his kicking attacks being more effective. Most likely not so much in range. Bigger muscles just means he's thick and hitting you with 50 pounds of lead, not so much them being longer. This is pretty scary since many of Decidueye's kick attacks are already pretty deadly. Let's just go down the list one by one. 6XXX goes over mid-lows and would do more damage. 2XX deals a ton more as a combo ender. 5XX would launch higher for better combo confirms, and 2Y is an annoying poke. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And lastly, with Meteor Legs, Decidueye's jump would improve to not be taking out a sky in situations like this that most characters don't have to deal with. But let us transition into more interesting topics that leave physicality, such as Hisuian Decidueye now lacking ghost dashes for his forward dash and soaring back dash. Hisuian Decid suffering from true despair in the fact that he is now a fighting type mortal and no longer a ghost type. But besides that, in Pokken, Decidueye's arrows are covered in a green energy, unlike his normal arrows which are seen here. Decidueye's other projectiles, besides Spirit Shackle, are also green. These match his green hoodie, while in Legends Arceus, we can see through triple arrows that Hisuian Decidueye's arrows are orange. In Pokken, this would apply to having all orange projectiles to better match his new red look. This is just an aesthetic, of course, but speaking of projectiles, Hisuian Decidueye is a closer ranged fighter than his counterpart, fitting for the aforementioned fighting type he's become. This presents a unique situation due to how many projectiles Decidueye possesses in Pokken. My take on this would be certain projectiles that clearly output a lot of effort, such as Release Y and Field Phase JY, maintain the same range and power. Meanwhile, lesser ranged options would have slightly less range, but also slightly more power. Fairly simple for these changes, but it makes a lot of sense given the physical differences and style of both Decidueye. He would be granted more damage up close with his kicks and certain projectiles, but with reduced range with his his wing attacks and those same projectiles. In summary, some of the options Decidueye has are riskier with high reward overall. If we were to swap out move animations entirely, I would change certain wing attacks for kicks, done in a way that retains the range and power of Decidueye's old wing attacks. There are many ways to handle these moveset changes, and any small change will affect the character greatly due to Decidueye's status as a top tier threat in Pokken. So if small changes will affect Decidueye greatly, let's talk about Decidueye's Pokemon attacks, moves that will no doubt be affected immensely. My theory for the longest time was that these would be mostly the same, as if you could transfer a Rowlet or Dartrix with attacks from Sun and Moon that it uses in Pokken to Legends Arceus before evolving it. That was before learning that Pokemon sent to Legends Arceus don't keep those moves. And Hisuian Owl isn't transferable to the other main series games yet, so we have to be creative here. Alolan Decidueye has many Pokemon attacks in Pokken, and we're still keeping the idea that will make Hisuian Decidueye's moves function similarly to the original. This will make Hisuian Decidueye feel much more fresh as a fighter than the points previously mentioned, whether intentional or not. Let's start off with attacks they both share and don't need any changes. Leaf Blade! That's actually the only move they share. The follow-up attack in Burst could be the same, but yeah, that's it. Luckily, there are some moves where if you just called it by a different move name, you would just believe it to be that move. Instead of Razor Leaf, Hisuian Decidueye would be using Leafage or Magical Leaf. And that's also pretty much it. Alolan Decidueye utilizes moves in weird ways that are hard to simply slot another move in that his Hisuian form has. Many of these changes to fit with Alolan Owl performs in Pokken might be stretching it a bit in a way that changes how Hisuian Decidueye would play. But hey, it's more fun that way at the very least. Decidueye's 6A Fury attack, which transitions into Leaf Blade or Leaf Move 3000, is a bit difficult with the lack of multi-moves in Legends Arceus. I propose a full-body projectile rushing move using Swift, where Owl flies with the spinning stars that he creates, hitting multiple times just like Fury attack. Since Decidueye is only along for the ride and the stars are attacking, this would count as projectile hits. Using projectiles also means less worry about smaller reach, since Alolan Decidueye uses his wing to attack. Otherwise, Hisuian Decidueye would have just had a similar attack with less range. Transitioning into the follow-up attacks and hover would also work the same. For Foray, Frenzy Plant, the big DP that Owl desperately needs, it's a bit weird. The big Hyper Beam elemental moves that the starters usually learn don't exist in Legends Arceus. Hisuian Decidueye may not have access to it, but Leaf Storm would make a decent substitute. Leaf Storm has a downside like Frenzy Plant in the main games, and it being a projectile attack in other media doesn't mean much when Frenzy Plant is also typically depicted as long-ranged. Imagine it as a counter version of Chandeler's Overheat without the debuff, hitting behind Decidueye with similar vertical and horizontal reach to Frenzy Plant. No worry about debuffs, but just as punishable as Frenzy Plant on block. Next is Alolan Decidueye's 8A, Smackdown, a very unique move that'd be hard to find a replacement for, but on the bright side, the Magnemite will be saved from its harassment at last. What if we smack down the opponent instead though? Hisuian Decidueye could use Gust diagonally up into the air, with angled versions like Smackdown, though no all three angles at once, Chaos and Burst mode. For one, why would you do this, Pokken developers? I want to play the game. And two, this is a command grab, but it only hits in the air. Afterward, Decid has a follow-up with Air Cutter, with slashes of wind striking from above to launch them down to the ground. This is an optional follow-up. Decidueye can forego it by not holding the button, and the opponent will slowly descend after Gust. Combos are granted up close, though it would scale quite a bit. This fits very well with Hisuian Decidueye's close quarters fighting style, only being allowed to properly combo on closer command grabs, but getting a knockdown from far away with the follow-up to get in. The fierceness of the Hisuian Burb extends to the Alolan 1 Soaring A, Acrobatics. This is surprisingly simple, swapping this in for Brave Bird to grant red armor before going into a small cutscene like a normal grad would on hit. It won't pierce, unlike Blaziken's high jump kick, but it would side swap like Acrobatics while dealing great damage. He does a funny little loop as Hisuian Decidueye scoops them up and switches sides. It's not punishable, though he's minus on block and will always take recoil damage just like in the main games. There is no held input like Acrobatics has due to our theoretical Gust 8A possessing that feature. Acrobatics, just by its name really, matches its fancy presentation, especially with how Decidueye is presented as a nerdy showboat in Pokken. Now we have a hot-headed owl who just goes for the kill like a hawk. Next, Decidueye has another aerial Pokemon move, his JA, Sucker Punch. As a move for stalling before an attack, Hisuian Decidueye's best option would be Roost. This is a healing move where the longer the button is held, the more great HP is restored while softly descending in place. When the button is let go, a small gust of feathers surrounds him as an attack to protect him, and then he falls like a rock to the ground. Hisuian Decidueye would be the type of Pokemon to weaponize a restorative move. We are almost at the end. Now we're finding a replacement for Release A, Feather Dance. Instead of a slow projectile that grants debuffs, For the time period of Legends Arceus, it's fitting to have this be spikes. Laying out some Caltrops at a set distance to stop opponents from running away benefits Hisuian Decidueye greatly. It would be a single strike with decent hit stun, but is active as soon as it hits the ground, unlike many other traps that go behind the opponent up close. This resembles the charged version of Spirit Shackle 2, and speaking of which, our final major change is in the form of just that, Decidueye's 5A, Spirit Shackle. It seems pretty obvious that this signature move of Alolan Decidueye would be replaced by triple arrows, Hisuian Decidueye's version of the attack. Let's describe how Spirit Shackle functions to get a clearer idea of what we're working with. Near its startup, Spirit Shackle erases oncoming projectiles before firing off, granting a debuff on hit that negates the use of support Pokemon. Charging the move leaves a small trap that knocks the opponent down. Using the move also makes the Decidueye briefly airborne, but this doesn't matter too much. Triple Arrows has several traits that easily replicates all of these effects. His Axe Kick would be a more convincing reason for its projectile deletion properties, making him airborne in the process and providing an up-close extra hit. Still befitting of the Hisuian form's battle style. In fact, being an up-close fighter would lower the range of the arrows, making this more of a close to mid-range tool. The 3 arrows would count as 1 hit each, following close behind one another like in Legends Arceus. And since these hits are so delayed, Hisuian Decidueye is able to combo off of it on air hits, making this a unique combo structure that separates Hisuian Decidueye from its Alolan counterpart. It would also be safe on block. As for the debuff, it defense downs opposing Pokemon in Legends Arceus, which can easily translate into Pokken with the same effect, applying the debuff during the kick. And instead of having a held input, imagine holding the button to have Hisuian Decidueye launch the arrows right away at the cost of no debuff with the lack of the kick. In Field Phase, Charged Spirit Shackle splits into 3 arrows. I shouldn't have to explain why this works out. Though in Burst, Decidueye always fires 3 arrows, and uses 5 when charged. I would keep it at 3 at all times for the Hisuian Burb. It's the only correct way. And as for his Burst attack, orange, but with like 2 more arrows. But hey, Decidueye is a cool character and his Hisuian form wouldn't change that fact. I hope you enjoyed this Theorycraft type video. If you'd like to see more content all about Pokken, from sets to discussions to more fun ideas of my crazy antics that display my ineptitude of acting like a normal person, please consider subscribing to the Kascoon Attack Force of the Jukem Cinematic Universe. Wishing you all a great one.